Ale na piyasa punaha Mai sang brahma yogena nistirya brahma helenam pratyeshatyam nikashame kalenal piyasa punaha Mai sangramba yogena nistirya brahma helenam pratyeshyatang nikashame kalenal piyasha punaha. Please chant.
Mai sambrahma yogena nistriya brahma helanam pratyeshetam nikasham me kalpe nalpiyasha puna. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Mahi sambhrama yogena vistirya brahmahelanam pratyeshayatam nikasham me kalenal yasa punaha. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Mai Rambha Yogena Nistriya Brahma Balena Pratyashayatam Nikasham Me Kalena Lipyasya Puna. Hare Krishna.
Mai sambrahma yogena nistirya brahma helanam pratyeshyatam nikasham me kale nalpiyasa puna.
Anyone else? Okay. Mai unto me. Sangrambha yogena, by practice of mystic yoga in anger. Nistirya, being liberated from. Brahma helanam, the result of disobedience to the Brahmanas. Pratyeshyatam, will come back. Nikasham, near. Me, Kalaneya, in due course of time. Alpiyasa, very short. Punaha, again. Translation by Abhay Charanaravinda Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. The Lord assured the two Vaikuntha inhabitants, Jai and Vijay, by practicing the mystic yoga system in anger, you will be cleansed of the sin of disobeying the Brahmanas, and within a very short time return to me. Purport. The Supreme Personality of Godhead advised the two doorkeepers, Jai and Vijay, that by dint of bhakti yoga in anger, they would be delivered from the curses of the Brahmanas. Srila Madhva Muni remarks in this connection that by practicing bhakti yoga, one can become free from all sinful reactions. Even Brahma Shapa, or curse by a Brahmana, which cannot be overcome by any other means, can be overcome by bhakti yoga. One can practice bhakti yoga in many rasas. There are 12 rasas, 5 primary and 7 secondary. The 5 primary rasas constitute direct bhakti yoga. But although the 7 secondary rasas are indirect, they are also counted within bhakti yoga if they are used in the service of the Lord. In other words, Bhakti yoga is all-inclusive. If somehow or other, if one somehow or other becomes attached to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he becomes engaged in Bhakti Yoga, as described in Srimad Bhagavatam 10:29-15, Kamam Krodham Bhayam. The gopis were attracted to Krishna by Bhakti Yoga in relationship of a lusty desire. Similarly, Kamsa was attached to Bhakti Yoga by dint of fear of his death. Thus, Bhakti Yoga is so powerful that even becoming an enemy of the Lord and always thinking of him can deliver one very quickly. It is said, Vishnu Bhakta Smrito Daiva Asuras Tad Vipanyayaha. Devotees of Lord Vishnu are called demigods, whereas non-devotees are called asuras. But Bhakti Yoga is so powerful that both demigods and asuras can derive its benefits if they always think of the personality of Godhead. The basic principle of Bhakti Yoga is to think of the Supreme Lord always. The Lord says in Bhagavad Gita 18:65, Man mana bhavamad bhakta. Always think of me. It doesn't matter which way one thinks. The very thought of the personality of Godhead is the basic principle of Bhakti Yoga. In the material planets, there are different grades of sinful activities, of which disrespecting a Brahmana or a Vaishnava is the most sinful. Here, it is clearly stated that one can overcome even that grave sin simply by thinking of Vishnu, not even favorably, but in anger. Thus, even if those who are not devotees always think of Vishnu, they become free from all sinful activities. Krishna consciousness is the highest form of thought. Lord Vishnu is thought of in this age by chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna
Krishna
Hare
Hare
Hare,
Hare,
Hare
Hare
Rama,
Rama, Hare Rama,
Rama Rama.
Rama Hare.
From the statements of the Bhagavatam, it appears that if one thinks of Krishna even as an enemy, that particular qualification, thinking of Krishna or Vishnu, cleanses one of all sins. Translation again. The Lord assured the two Vaikuntha inhabitants, Jai and Vijay, by practicing the mystic yoga system in anger, you will be cleansed of sin, of disobeying the Brahmanas, and within a short time, a very short time, return to me. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Nitanamane Namaste Sarasvate Devi Gauravani Pacharne Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pashtachi Deshatarne Om Agnanatimirandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Vanchakalpatrubhyas Chakrapa Sindubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Hare Krishna. So, today we're talking about Bhakti Yoga in anger. It sounds a bit strange, right? Of course, we read the purport and have the context as to why. In this particular case, it at least makes some sense, right? From the classes leading up to this one, we understood that Krishna, he wanted to engage in the pastime of fighting, right? And he wanted his rivals to be as worthy opponents as possible. And he wanted some real fights, not just friendly competitive fights. He wanted some real fights. So in order to fuel that type of fight, some fierce anger should be there, right? The strong eagerness to fight. So in context, we understand that. But still, I imagine that the term bhakti yoga in anger, or as worded in the verse, sangramba yogena, practice of mystic yoga in anger, sounds a bit strange to most people, especially considering that bhakti means loving devotional service, and the emotion of anger generally falls in a category that's opposite to love. And of course, when we think of mystic yoga, we generally think of people striving for peace, right? Om Shanti, people trying to overcome their anger so that they can have peace, right? That's how things seem to go in the material world, right? This is the world of duality. So we have these opposing emotions that generally don't seem to complement one another. Sometimes there's aspects of them that tend to or seem to complement one another. Um, uh, but in general, we experience these things in a different way. But as Srila Prabhupada mentioned in the purport, that Krishna consciousness is all inclusive. So anyone can be engaged in Krishna's service, and also everything can be used in Krishna's service. And we also know, Kaivalya Prabhu pointed this out yesterday, that everything that is present in the material world that also exists in the spiritual world, right? Because this material world is a reflection of the spiritual world. So anything that we're experiencing here, we're also experiencing there. It's not with this material duality that we're experiencing it here in the material world. Although there are seemingly opposing emotions in the spiritual world, they're pure and they serve one another in harmony for the pleasure of Krishna, right? Just like everything else in the spiritual world. So it's not experienced like material duality, right? So there is this concept of seemingly opposing emotions, but it's not the same way material duality works. Right? There's nothing material at all in the spiritual world. And that may seem to be a contradictory statement, right? Because I just said that everything in the material world exists in the spiritual world, but then I said there's nothing material at all in the spiritual world. So how does that make any sense, right? But anything that is material, it has to take place in this illusory world, right? We know from Srimad Bhagavatam Chatur Shloki verse 2, and we brought that up last week as well, that anything that appears to be of any value, if it is without relation to Sri Krishna, has no reality. Krishna says, know it as my illusory energy, that reflection which appears to be in darkness. Right? So there's actually no contradiction here. Everything can be used in Krishna's service, but as long as we are dealing with anything material, in other words, as long as we're not seeing something's complete connection with Krishna, then that means we have to engage it in Krishna's service in the material world until we become completely purified of that illusory tendency. Right. So the material world is where we learn the difference between the substance and the shadow, or the original and the reflection, or reality and illusion, however you want to say it. The primary and the secondary. Right. So actually, since I just mentioned it, right, because I said reality and illusion, even illusion exists in the spiritual world, right? Just not material illusion, right? So everything can be either material or spiritual. But even illusion exists in the spiritual world, right? So in the material world, we have material illusion, or Mahamaya. But in the spiritual world, there's spiritual illusion, or Yoga Maya, right? And so they're similar in the sense that in both places, Maya prevents us from the full truth that Krishna is God, right? Material Maya, it's where we consider that Krishna can't be God because, well, I am, right? I'm the controller, I'm the enjoyer, so I'm acting as if I'm God. So therefore, Krishna can't be God, right? That's how Maya works, right? I make my decisions exclusively, or at least mostly, for my own sake, right? But spiritual illusion is where we consider that Krishna can't be God because he's my friend, for example, or he's my child, right? Even in Vaikuntha, where um, the mood is that of awe and reverence, and even in the Shantaras or neutral relationships, the full conception of Krishna's godness is somewhat covered. It has to be. Otherwise, there would be no relationship, right? Because if we actually knew how infinitesimally small we are compared to the infinite Supreme Lord, and that there were countless living entities, why would we consider ourselves worthy of any interaction with him, right? So there has to be some sort of covering of that full cognizance, full awareness of Krishna's godness or godhood, right? Because he enjoys rasa, relationships, right? So because he likes to experience that, then he covers some of that knowledge with this yogamaya, this spiritual illusion, so that he can relish each person's mood, right? He's unlimited, so he can interact with all of us at the same time with no extraneous effort, right? It's no problem for him, right? So he prefers, though, to interact personally with each of his devotees, no matter what level they are comfortable um, interacting with him on. He reciprocates to that accordingly, right? So as I mentioned, there are spiritual versions of everything, right? And so the spiritual and material versions of everything. So forms, right? You have the material form, material body, which goes through the 6 transformations. And then you have your spiritual form that's eternal. It's full of happiness and fully cognizant. Then you have your relationships. Again, material relationships, they go through the 6 transformations. The spiritual relationships are eternal and they're ever increasing. Qualities, right? In the material world, those qualities, again, go through the 6 transformations. In the spiritual world, they're eternal, they're blissful, and they're fully aware, except for those parts that are covered by yogamaya, as we mentioned. Names, again, material and spiritual. Time, right? There's material time and then there's spiritual time. And illusion that we just talked about. There's material illusion and spiritual illusion, right? In the material world, all of these things, forms, relationships, qualities, names, time, illusion, they limit us, right? So in the material world, all of these things have limitations, right? I'm limited by my form. I'm limited by the relationships that I have with things I can do in different relationships. I'm limited by my material qualities. I can't do things that I'm not qualified for. I'm limited by my name. I'm limited by time, right? The time factor is always going, and it also determines what can be done in what particular time. And illusion. All of these things in the material world limit us. But in the spiritual world, all of these same things, they just serve the relationship and pastime to enhance them, right? So I've given the example of time a lot. I'll give it again because it's an easy one to understand. So here, time limits us again. So nighttime we do nighttime things, daytime we do daytime things. We try to counteract that, right? We put blinds on the windows so that we can do nighttime things during the daytime if we want, and we put up all these lights so that we can do daytime things at night if we want. But even though we're trying to counteract these things, ultimately we have a time limit with this temporary form that we have. And so gradually and consistently, we are marching toward the end of this particular form that we're identifying with. And then, of course, we know we'll get another form that we will identify with. And hopefully, after some time, we'll learn to know the difference between this external form and the actual form, or the soul. And we can cultivate Krishna consciousness so that we no longer have to take these temporary forms. Right. But so that's in the material world, right? That's how time works. But in the spiritual world, it's not that time doesn't exist. It's that time doesn't limit us there, right? It's not a limiting factor. It's a assisting factor. So there's this semblance of time, meaning sometimes it's daytime, sometimes it's nighttime. There are seasons, right? Depending on what pastimes are happening, right? But all of these things can happen at any moment, and they can switch, and they can last as long as they want, right? It's not limited. They're serving the pastime. So if Krishna is dancing with the gopis, then they're underneath a full moon, and it's autumn. But even though it's autumn, all of the different aromas that one would smell from the flowering trees of spring are also there. They're available. So time is serving the pastime. So everything in the spiritual world is personal, and everything is cooperating to give Krishna and his devotees the best possible experience. So all of these things serve the pastimes in the spiritual world, whereas in the material world, they limit us to what we can do. So in his purport, Srila Prabhupada mentioned the 5 primary and 7 secondary rasas. Kaivalya Prabhu also mentioned those yesterday, so we don't have to go too much into it. But the 5 primary rasas, those are the permanent ones, which indicate the type of relationship we have with Krishna. It can be neutral, it can be that of a servant master, it can be that of friends, it could be that parental or conjugal. The secondary rasas, which can either be temporarily manifested, or it means according to the pastime, or sometimes indirectly influential. Those are Hasya, Adbhuta, Vira, Karuna, Rodra, Bhaya, and Bibhatsa, or laughter, wonder, chivalry, compassion, anger, disaster, and fear. Right? So we say these are either indirect or temporary, because whatever permanent rasa we have, permanent relationship, or one of the 5 primary rasas, sometimes that relationship can be influenced by one or multiple of these for a brief moment, or for some time, in order to enhance that primary relationship, right? In order to enhance the flavor of that primary relationship. So sometimes these appear. So today, of course, we're talking about anger, so we're going to focus on the Rodra one. So in the spiritual world, the transcendental emotion of anger sometimes shows up to enhance the depth of love for the beloved, right? The overall bliss increases unfathomably due to an occasional and temporary semblance of anger during some playful exchange, right? So in order to increase that love, then some anger is shown there. It's something that the beloved has done, so that the beloved can then rectify that, and then a deeper relationship is then experienced, right? And we've also heard how these apparent contradictions can exist regarding unity and separation, right? Sometimes, if those of you who know the pastime of Prem Sarovara, how that was formed, Srimati Radharani and Sri Krishna were sitting together, so they're together in union, but a concept of separation came up because there was a bee that was flying around, and one of the cowherd boys they saw that they thought maybe it was disturbing them. Of course, they're just focusing on each other, so they weren't really disturbed by the bee. But once the bee was successfully shooed away, they said, Madhu is gone. And when Srimati Radharani heard Madhu is gone, even though they were referring to the bee, she thought they were referring to Krishna. And although she was looking directly at him, just this concept or the conception of Krishna being gone made her feel separation from Krishna, even though she was with him. And so she started crying. And when she started crying, Krishna, who is always empathetic to his devotees and reciprocating with them, he became sad that Srimati Radharani was crying in separation. And so he started crying, and when she saw Krishna crying, then she started crying more. So their tears formed this lake, Prem Sarovara, where we can go. So we can see that even in unity, there can be this strong, strong feeling of separation, and even in separation, there can be this strong sense of unity. Right? We've discussed this many times throughout these pastimes. But certainly, this pure form of spiritual anger, what we were talking about above, which is in the spiritual world, we certainly are not experiencing that, right? Due to our being firmly established in this material world, we have this deep connection, attachment to the material world. But there's also material anger, right? I said there's material and spiritual versions of everything. So we talked about that spiritual version, which is sometimes introduced temporarily to increase the flavor of that positive emotion or that permanent emotion. So that doesn't really pertain to us much. It pertains to us in understanding how some pastimes work, but for us, we generally have experienced the material part of anger, right? At least to some extent, I would think that each of us has experienced some sort of anger, right? And that anger, just like anything else, can be used in Krishna's service, right? Because Krishna consciousness being all-inclusive, anyone can engage in Krishna's service, and anything can be used in Krishna's service, right? So here we're talking about today anger used in devotional service, and that is actually something that I'm quite familiar with. So it's providence that today I have this verse. So since I'm relatively generally quite peaceful these days, it might be hard for some of you to believe. Maybe those of you who only have known me for 10 or 20 years. But believe it or not, anger was a very important and significant part of my initial cultivation of bhakti, right? Might be hard to believe. Those who've known me for a long time, they understand. I was told early on that we can engage everything we have in the service of the Lord. And since I was a very observant teenager, I had plenty of anger. So I figured that that's what I would engage in Krishna's service, right? That was the most prominent thing that I had. So now the reason why I said observant when I said teenagers, because most, if not all, teenagers are angry to some extent, right? But since I was also observant, I imagine that I had more to be mad at, right? Since I was always observing things, I had more things to be mad about, right? I was angry that people exploited other people and resources. I was angry that people were duplicitous, right? They weren't being real with each other. They would act one way, and then they would act a different way in a different circumstance. I was angry that sometimes good things happen to bad people and bad things happen to good people. It just didn't seem just, right? I was angry that people in general tended to ignore problems that they could easily help solve, right? Pretending that, well, it's just not my problem. That's someone else's issue to deal with. I was mad at myself for not being able to fix the things that I was mad about, right? A lot of anger was there. So that's what I had. So that's what I engaged in Krishna's service, right? Because whatever we have can be a valuable tool in Krishna's service. We just need to know how to do it properly, right? It should be guided from the Shastra and under the instructions of the Guru and following the examples of the sadhus, right? So we just have to learn how to do it properly. So anger was my main tool for a while. And I even came up with a term back in my teenage years. And it's Krodha Mishra Bhakti. You may have heard of Karma Mishra Bhakti and Jnana Mishra Bhakti. But young Charucandra was practicing Krodha Mishra Bhakti, or Bhakti mixed with
Anger.
right, Krodha Mishra Bhakti. This isn't an authorized term, by the way. This is something that teenage me came up with. Because I figured, well, I wasn't trying to accumulate any sort of material, fruitive, none of that. And I didn't fancy myself an intellectual, but I did have anger, right? So I figured, all right, I'm gonna use that. And so that's what my bhakti was and still is mixed with, just to a much different extent now. So initially, I used my anger to motivate myself to do better, right? It was fuel for me to become productive, to do something about the problems, not just complain about them, but actually try to make them better. After I learned the true distinction between spirit and matter, I used it to motivate myself to take the process of bhakti more seriously, right? Because trying to solve a spiritual problem with a material solution clearly is not going to work, right? And that's what I was trying to do before, because I didn't understand the difference between spirit and matter. So all the things that I was angry at and trying to fix, I wasn't actually trying to fix them in the right way. I was trying to, at best, I was treating some symptoms, but it's like putting a Band-Aid on a bullet wound, right? It's not sufficient, right? So understanding the difference between spirit and matter, then understanding the difference between the spiritual problem and the material problems, I used that anger to motivate myself to take the process of bhakti more seriously so that I could actually become more efficient in making a actual change, not just a temporary polishing of a mess, right? And then ultimately, I realized that the root of all my anger was my misuse of free will, right? That's what I was really angry about, is because in the material world, nothing works the way it should. But it's my fault that I'm here in this material world because I misused my free will. I decided to see what life would be like independent or separate from Krishna, right? But since our beloved Srila Prabhupada told us about Sri Krishna's unconditional love for us and our capacity to purify our consciousness by proper use of this free will, most of that anger is dissipated, and it now has turned into gratitude, right? If we use the anger that we have about something we did wrong to correct the mistake, then it's actually productive and we can move past it. But if that anger prevents us from making any progress, then we're perpetually lost, right? So eventually that anger has to turn into something, right? So for me, eventually and gradually, it took a long time, that anger turned into gratitude because I understood that the things I was angry about weren't in some sense, they were worth being angry about, but ultimately they're not. Ultimately, we see that there's no situation that we can put ourselves in that Krishna's mercy can't save us from, right? So my anger for doing the wrong thing, by gradually engaging that in Krishna's service, because I had plenty of it, gradually turned into gratitude for Krishna's unconditional love and mercy. And so although I still get annoyed, agitated, you know, angry, and, to much lesser extents, they're all used as motivating factors to increase this gratitude that I have for Krishna, to take the process of bhakti yoga much more seriously, to not lose sight of the goal, to continue on with the process, and to further cultivate the difference between a real problem and an illusory problem, because then, you know, that also exists there. So whatever we have, we need to learn how to use it properly and favorably in Krishna's service. And that means that we have to understand how to properly and favorably use these things by consulting with Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra. Always comes down to that. Whenever we try to, whenever our thoughts, words, or actions, any of those, are driven by sense perception, mundane logic, a moralistic ideal of social justice, and so on, material. That's all material. That will go through the 6 transformations, as we discussed before. But when we base it, our thoughts, words, actions, when those are guided by authorized Shastra, and again, Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra just means Shastra, Shastra, and Shastra. And so it's Shastra in 3 different forms, because the Guru will be giving instructions that are based on the Shastra that particularly apply to your situation. The sadhus, by their very lives, will show the example of what Shastra is saying. So if instead of our thoughts, minds, and words influenced by these various material things and giving us a material result, which will be temporary, if we focus on the Shastra and Guru and Sadhu, then our thoughts, minds, and words will be guided by spiritual influence, and then therefore it will be an eternal result. Right? So whatever we have, we need to learn to use it properly. Right? So I had anger. I learned to use that properly under the guidance of Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra, and then gradually that transformed to gratitude. Now, Jai and Vijay, they really didn't have anything to be angry about, right? They are liberated souls. This sort of thing doesn't happen in Vaikuntha. Kaivalya Prabhu also mentioned that. And the Kumaras also, they didn't really feel it necessary that these 2 Prabhus be cursed. But due to providence, this is how all of these happens, right? So due to a series of events, including delaying Lakshmi Devi from seeing her husband, denying entrance to the 4 Kumaras, and of course, ultimately, the Lord's desire to have a few proper fights, Jai and Vijay temporarily accepted this practice of mystic yoga in anger and fulfilled the Lord's desire, all while enjoying intimate pastimes with him, right? So in their context, practice of mystic yoga in anger makes sense, right? We also do not really have anything to be angry about, ultimately anyway, right? Because we're not really in any danger. We are certainly experiencing it. But even though we don't ultimately have anything to be angry about, we still have it nonetheless, right? And since it's material, it's keeping us in this world of repeated suffering. But we can redirect it, redirect our consciousness, um, so that we can utilize that anger in Krishna's service. Therefore, then it becomes purified, and we can take several steps closer to uncovering our true spiritual nature and engaging that in a favorable, loving relationship with Sri Krishna. So, whatever it is that we have, we need to learn to use it for Krishna. Uh, Anyone can attain perfection and overcome all obstacles by this process. So, whatever we have, we consult Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra to see how to use that properly in Krishna service, and then a sense of detachment will be, or will cultivate as knowledge is revealed to us knowledge is revealed to us so that we can distinguish the difference between reality and illusion. Our attachment to illusion will gradually fade away because we will actually understand its temporary nature, and our attachment to spirit will increase because we will see that that is actually what we have been searching for. There was another verse that Srila Prabhupada mentioned in the purport: Kamam, Krodham, Bhayam, Sneham, Aikyam, Sohridam, Evacha, Nityam, Harau, Vidadhato, Yanti, Tan, Mayatam, Hite. It says that persons who constantly direct their lust, anger, fear, protective affection, feeling of impersonal oneness, or friendship toward Lord Hari are sure to become absorbed in thought of him, right? So whatever you have, anger, fear, lust, protective affection, feeling of personal oneness, right? There's also this verse, akama sarvakamo va mokshakama udaradi, right? Whether you have no desires at all, akama, sarvakama, all of the desires, or anything in between that, or you're desiring liberation, approach Lord Krishna, right? And of course, we don't want to stay on that platform form of having all desires or desires for liberation. We want to eventually learn that the ultimate value of anything is service to Krishna, right? Not a separate desire. But in the meantime, whatever appreciation or affection that we have for the Supreme Lord, we should cultivate that constantly and sincerely, without cessation. And if we do that, we're going to be in good shape. Okay, let's stop there and see if there are any questions or comments or discussion. Whether it's about engaging anger in Krishna Bhakti or engaging some other maybe unexpected or surprising aspect of our life in Krishna's service. Yes, Dronacharya Prabhu. Hare
Hi,
Krishna.
Krishna, Charachandra Prabhu. Thank you so much for the class and a very thought-stimulating topic. I wanted to ask specifically about your situation, not to pry into your life, but just to better understand the idea of utilizing anger in Krishna service and becoming purified by it. Usually the example used is, quite often is Hanuman, getting angry at Ravana and burning down Lanka. Was the anger that you're talking about, was it directed toward Krishna directly? You were upset about, you mentioned at one point like injustices in the world and things like that. Were you upset at God because of that, or was it directed toward other people or
Yeah,
people
no,
that were inimical to
yeah,
God, or like what was it directed toward?
good question. And thankfully, my anger wasn't directed at God. It wouldn't have mattered. Honestly, that would have been okay too, because as that verse mentioned, the last one I just read, that sure, if that's what you got and you want to be angry at God, and we see that sometimes devout people, uh, they actually get angry at God for the things that are happening in the material world, not understanding all of the things that are going on. And he tolerates that. He has unconditional love for us, so that's okay as long as we're directing whatever we have at him. But no, my anger, thankfully, my anger was more directed at people not doing what I understood at the time God would have wanted us to do, right? And so you mentioned Hanuman, who I very much look up to. He's a perfect servant of Lord Ram, and I aspire to uh, become a fraction of that, have that servitude. He, of course, he's not a Mishra Bhakta, he's a pure Bhakta. And so anytime he displays him, there is a verse in the Hanuman Chalis that describes how Hanuman comes in a pleasing form to address Mother Sita Devi, and he comes in a form of wrath to burn Lanka. So we see that no matter what emotion Hanuman is displaying, it's because of the service. It's because of his service to Lord Ram. Uh, it's not that he was in a happy mood and then he saw Mother Sita, so he was, happy. But if he was having a bad day, then he would have been a little terse with her. No, it's that for that service, this is the mood, right? So that's what he took. His own mood wasn't a factor, right? And then so uh, when Ravana decided to, well, first he wanted to kill Hanuman, but he was advised that you can't kill a messenger. You can torture him. So once his tail was lit on fire, then he showed that wrath. But again, it wasn't personal wrath. Like, why did you light my tail on fire? It was you're keeping Sita from Ram, and you're also exploiting all of these other people. You're holding all these other people against their will, and you're spreading this. Um, we'll just say bad behavior, right? And so, in his service to Lord Ram, and he burned down Lanka, right? So it wasn't because of his personal emotion. So he's always just pure bhakti. So me, on the other hand, I was angry because of what I was perceiving, right? And it wasn't a perfect perception of what actually God wanted. It's just what I thought God wanted. So I got mad that, people were exploiting each other and also the world, the resources, um, uh, because I figured, since everything's coming from God, uh, we we should use it responsibly and kindly, and we shouldn't be duplicitous with one another. We should be honest with one another. All that cooperation, right? Um, and so that's where my anger was directed at first, just at people doing things that I didn't think were right. But I didn't have a true sense of righteousness, of dharma. I just, whatever I picked up along the way. So it was a material conception. But then after understanding the difference between spirit and matter, understanding um, that there are material problems and there are spiritual problems, then I understood that although some of my anger was trying to resolve that spiritual problem, I was doing it in a very material way, right? So I was just trying to treat the symptoms of the disease. But then using that anger as a motivating factor to see, because I didn't want to end up like that. That was my real fear. I didn't want to end up one of these people. and I was afraid. I was afraid that the world just turned everyone into this sort of type of person who's duplicitous and exploitative, that they just give up and stop trying to fight against all of these terrible things that are happening. And from some people's point of view, if there's an activist, for example, and they're seeing me, they might think that I gave up the good fight, right? They may say, well, you were unsuccessful in your use of anger for the purpose of good. But what we do come to know is that once we purify something, once we actually use something in Krishna service, it becomes purified to the extent that we no longer need it, but we will use it when necessary, right? So, again, most of my anger turned into appreciation because I understood that there is a way out of it, and it's a simple way, and it's not trying to fix the material world, because the material world can't be fixed. It goes through its cycles as a result of our collective karma, right? But we can get out of the cycle, and that's really the only way to fix it, right? So the anger helped me motivate myself to, first of all, learn the process of bhakti better, to understand it and apply it within myself, and then ultimately to help others to understand the difference between material problems and spiritual ones, and then to successfully make the changes that they're actually striving to do, instead of the ones that they're, in a misguided way trying to fix the world's problems. When I was in high school, before I met the devotees, one of the biggest problems I was trying to counteract was racism. And there were several racist people in my school. And there were some art projects that I was working on, and they were being destroyed because they said end racism. Anyway, there was this like big struggle that I was trying to, I was really trying to right this obvious wrong that is there in the world. I was mad about everything, even the education system. I wanted that to change as well. I had one really good teacher, and what I learned from him was that, essentially the way that the education system was run, I understood that it wasn't actually favorable for most people for a positive outcome. It was designed for something else. So many things that I was angry about. But yeah, to use them to motivate to do better, and to understand what are the difference between these problems and what the real problem is, and then to focus on that, to gain this appreciation. And then, of course, if it ever comes up again, if anger is required, then I'm familiar with it. So I will certainly be able to use it if necessary. But yeah, that's how that becomes purified in anything we use in Christian service. So I think most of you know the story of how I used to be a race car driver. And so that was another material attachment I had. I'm competitive by nature. I like precision. I like being able to experiment with things to find out how small changes can produce a significant outcome. And so I did that, and I was engaging that in Christian service. And once it was properly engaged in Christian service, then a sense of detachment arose. So in that, I could have either kept doing it, or I could have moved on to something better. And so I did. I moved on to something better. But if, for example, and this is obviously never going to happen, but if, for example, there was this just necessary, a drag race between good and evil, and it was going to help reestablish the principles of religion, destroy the pious, annihilate the miscreants, well then, there's probably better devotee drag racers than, or aspiring devotee drag racers than I. But if it were in a particular area where I just happened to be the only aspiring devotee drag racer, then yes, I would be able to take up that service again. But otherwise, I really have no interest in it. Right. So this is the thing, is whatever we have, whatever is very important. And anger was the most important thing in my life. It was the only thing that motivated me to do anything back then. So we take the most important thing that in our life and we learn to use that in Krishna service so it becomes purified. And then we can either continue to use that in Krishna service or we can move on to something better. Right. That is the process. So whether it's anger or a competitive nature, or anything, whatever we're spontaneously attracted to, whatever we see of value that is not connected to Krishna, that is illusion, we have to see how, okay, the potency within that thing that I'm attracted to is just Krishna's potency. So now how can I use it properly instead of for my own sense enjoyment? How is it going to please the senses of the Lord of the senses, right? Hrishikena, Hrishikesha. And when we do that, again, always has to be guided by Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra. When we successfully do that, then that desire becomes purified, right? And don't worry, you have plenty of more desires to purify. So don't worry about losing that one, right? So we just have to keep doing this, right? And then the next thing that we're now, so how do we engage that? Now, how do I engage this? And when we do that, the process becomes so much easier and so much more natural until the point where it actually becomes spontaneous, right? That we want to do the process, not that we're doing it because we know it's the right thing to do, right? And so this is our method. But yes, I gained a lot of inspiration, of course, from Hanumanji, who showed the perfection of anger, right? Probably a lot of my appreciation of him is because of that. And then, of course, I came to appreciate him on all levels because he was able to display all variety of those emotions, and it was always based on what is best to serve Sri Ram, right? Not on what is best for Hanuman. He doesn't act in that way. So he also taught me selflessness. So right, so when we this is great that this came up because I regretted that last week when you asked about these different processes that we can employ to cultivate bhakti. There was another exercise that I used to give, and I didn't say it, and I wish I would have, but now it just happened to come up again. So I did the one about the two lists last week. So this week, here's another assignment if anyone wants to do it. It's not mandatory, but it's highly recommended. Think of a devotee that you're very inspired by. You're always inspired by their devotion, right? And then think, what is it about this particular devotee that I find so inspiring? And it's going to be one of these qualities that are listed in Nectar of Devotion or in the lists in Bhagavad Gita. There's some quality that this particular devotee has that's most attractive to you, right? So first you think of the devotee that you're very much, and so in my case, it was Hanuman. And because he was able to use his anger properly in Krishna's service. So then, but as time goes on, you start to see, in other words, you start understanding how to use that quality properly, but then you're also seeing all of these other qualities in that person. Sorry, so back to the assignment. So something, a devotee that you look up to that inspires you in Krishna consciousness, what it is about that devotee that's so inspiring, then once you can pinpoint at least one of those qualities, because there's going to be so many, then what's the word? Intentionally, throughout the day, whenever by default you would not be able to properly manifest that quality, think about what that particular devotee would do in that situation. Say this devotee, say I'm attracted to um, uh, Krishna Prabhu, we'll call him. And Krishna Prabhu, the reason I'm so attracted to him is because he's very tolerant, right? Uh, uh, more tolerant than a tree. Taro iva sahishnuna, right? So I appreciate their tolerance. So then here I am at my job, I'm at work, and someone says something that normally I would not I would not tolerate. Uh, because of my conditioned nature. So then I think, okay, what would this particular devotee do in this situation, right? Would they blow up? Would they, sort of redirect? Would they simultaneously address the thing that is, depending on how, depending on what the nature of the offense was that you wouldn't tolerate? In other words, how would they deal with the situation? And then try learning from their example, try to deal with it in a way that's more like that, right? And then so gradually we start seeing that since there are people that we admire and that we're inspired by, and they're the qualities that they possess, that we too can develop those qualities because we have an appreciation for them. We understand their value. We just have to learn from their behavior. That is actually the definition of sadhu sangha. That's it. There's that sat principle that's there, which is the qualities that that person has. There's that inspiration that you have from them, right? That's the sangha. You have an attachment, right? And then once, because of that attachment and that sat principle, once there's actual a transferal or an uncovering within ourselves of that quality, that is sadhu sangha, right? So this exercise is also great. Think of any devotee that really encourages or inspires you. Think of what it is about that devotee that is most inspiring. And then because you already know you have a sense of value for that quality, just start cultivating it. Start in circumstances where you normally would act in one way, act in a better way because of the association of that devotee, right? And then you'll see that as time goes on, there's so many other qualities in all of these devotees, maybe some that you wouldn't even expect, right? Right, most people wouldn't think that you'd get the selflessness from a monkey, right? Or detachment from someone who was fighting on the wrong side of the Battle of Kurukshetra, right? But actually, that took a lot of detachment, right? It took a lot of, anyway, those who know the story know the story. So whatever we have that's important to us, we have to learn how to redirect our consciousness so the reason that's important to us is centered around Krishna, not centered around ourselves. And that's the problem. I don't know if that answered your question, Dronacharya Prabhu. I have a tendency to do that. I think I start to answer your question and then I go off on a tangent, but hopefully it worked.
No, it was very elaborate, and I appreciate that very much. You gave much better context for me to understand the situation, or the subject matter. So thank you.
Thank you. Anything else? Okay. So then we can end here. I thank you all for joining and giving me this opportunity. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha, Kripasinubhya, Vaishnava.
Maybe